I didn't like working with him, man. It's just that damn simple. I didn't like it.
This is Stephen A. Smith on a recent appearance on the Joe Budden podcast, and he said a lot of interesting things about Max Kellerman.
I thought the show was stale. I thought that we had flatlined when it came to the public at large, and I'm trying to win. I didn't want to go from number 1 to number 2 when Skip left. That's not what I wasn't having that. That shit was not going to happen.
At this point, it sounds like the numbers were just plateauing or they were decreasing, and Joe Budden asked him about this.
Did anything in the numbers say that you might have been headed that way?
No, but to me it did.
Creatively?
To me it did, not just creatively, but the consistency of the number.
Got it.
In other words, it wasn't going this way.
Yeah.
It was just there.
And at this point, you're just thinking, okay, Stephen A. Smith just wants to shake things up. But then he goes on further and says this about Max Kellerman.
You know, listen, I had mad respect from him from the standpoint that white dude, highly intelligent, Ivy League educated from Columbia, smart as a whip, can talk his ass off, can talk about anything. And I get all of that. But you weren't an athlete and you weren't a journalist. And the absence of the two components left people wondering, why should we listen to you?
And then he would go on to justify this by talking about he saw the YouTube metrics, the Q ratings, the focus groups.
It was like I was damn near doing the show by myself because we were oceans apart in terms of cachet. Well, how are you oceans apart from me if you sitting right across from me 5 days a week for the whole 2 hours? Because one of us is resonating and one of us is not. In that platform.
And this is where people got outraged on Twitter and were saying that perhaps the person that wasn't resonating was you, Stephen A., not Max Kellerman. And in fact, Max Kellerman did pay his dues in the industry long ago, just like you did. And they were going further and talking about how every time they would talk about Colin Kaepernick or, issues of race and social justice, Max Kellerman would always outshine Stephen A. in those topics. And Stephen A. just, quite frankly, had enough. It got to the point where, at one point, Tara Owens said that he was blacker than Stephen A. Smith himself.
Again, you mentioned, obviously, Max is going to get in here. And like I said, I'm in the streets. Max almost seems blacker than you, Stephen A., with what he's coming, with his commentary.
With all due respect, my brother.
I'm just saying, dog.
Wait a minute.
And this weekend, Tara Owens responded to somebody actually posting about this and saying, yeah, this is why Stephen A. got mad. Stephen A. retorts, quote tweets him talking about he's a sorry-ass dude and you pull some trifling shit, talking about he's going to expose himself if he keeps talking like this. And then Tara Owens talks about how he has nothing to hide and how he's Team Max and how apparently he was in Colorado the day Stephen A. was there and that he could have confronted him face to face if he had wanted to. Interesting. And then you begin to see what Stephen A. does here, trying to milk this situation for what it is. Content. It's content to him, apparently. He's going to expose him during the podcast that he has on Monday. Ooh, spicy stuff.
Even going to mention Max Kellerman. I know y'all thought I wouldn't. I am not happy that he is gone.
And I remember months ago when he was talking about the ESPN layoffs and the people affected. He put out a clip on Twitter, teasing the pod. And Max Kellerman wasn't even mentioned once in that clip. And it made people think, is Stephen A. Smith that bitter? Does he hate him that much? But in fact, he actually did mention him in the pod, the full pod. And this is where I got the clip from. And Stephen A. was simply saying back then that the problem was the debate format. Max just didn't fit.
Just because I don't want to work with you directly in a debate show doesn't mean I didn't want to work with you. Doesn't mean I couldn't have worked with him covering a boxing match. Doesn't mean I couldn't have worked with him covering a UFC match. Doesn't mean I could have worked with him doing Sports Center, a Sports Center segment, or somebody else. I'm just talking about a 2-hour debate show. I wanted a different partner. That's all. I wish the brother nothing but the best.
But how often does Stephen A. do this? How often were they both, collaborating and speaking to each other? Right? Stephen A. Smith on the Joe Budden podcast even said they didn't speak much since he got ousted from First Take.
And very consistent about it. There's nothing personal. We weren't enemies or to be real, we ain't spoke since. Other than high and by, or if I had to go on the show when they were doing the morning show, I would get interviewed. But there's been no conversations since, and that's fine with me. That's no problem, because it wasn't like we were boys or anything like that.
Stephen A. Smith, you are not slick, man. You also went up to the head honcho, just like you said, and gave him an ultimatum.
When I went upstairs to management, my exact words were, look, if he's that important to you, give him first take. I'll leave.
Stephen A.
I'll leave. 2 hours later, I got the call. We're making a change.
And then you try to downplay the impact of this to Max Kellerman. You're saying, oh, he didn't really get fired. He had his own radio show. He was going to get on ESPN and still do his work, but not with First Take, right? And then you go on and play the victim yourself.
See, where I'll push back on anybody who talked about the career or the firing, I'll go back to me in 2009. Stephen A., your services were no longer, we're not renewing your deal. You're not renewing your deal. It is not a unilateral decision.
And what's really interesting is that now Stephen A. Smith is making this more so about Max Kellerman. Whereas years ago, when the news came out, when the reports were coming out and the rumors were spreading, he was making this more so about him and Max and how the pair just wasn't working.
I wasn't pointing the finger at him. I was saying we did not work as a pair. I think that Max is one of the nicest guys in the world. He's incredibly knowledgeable about his boxing and other sports, by the way. If I sat up there and I said, it's his fault, that's a different argument. That's not what I said. What I said is we don't work together. And a decision needs to be made regarding us. And that's what I was taking responsibility for. And I will never run from that.
And even weeks before that, when he actually confirmed the rumors for the first time of him wanting Max off the show, he said the same stuff.
And it wasn't really about asking him to be off the show. It was about the fact that I knew that we together, as far as I was concerned, was not a great partnership anymore. And that was something that needed to change.
And even though Stephen A. was not on air because of a no surgery for sleep apnea, it did feel weird not seeing him on Max's last appearance. It did feel like, yeah, there wasn't really that much of a camaraderie there. It seemed like Stephen A. Smith was over the whole thing. And this all just really shines him in the bad light, shows him out to be a slime ball. And right here, we see how Stephen A. really feels about Max Kellerman. I mean, to try to discredit the dude, first off, is already a big signal that this was more personal. Okay? This firing, quote unquote, is more so about you and how you felt about Max Kellerman. It wasn't about that partnership bullshit that you were giving us. No. Now we're seeing the truth. We're seeing what really happened, okay? And how it was really orchestrated. I mean, what makes you so different than Max Kellerman? To say that he's not an athlete or a journalist. What are you? I mean, what makes you stand out? And to go at the execs and say, basically, it's either you take me or you take him. Come on, man. It's clear that you were trying to push for the execs to fire him because you just didn't like that he was taking the shine from you. It's actually sad that he had to bring this up again because now it's got the internet hating on him again. And I just don't think Stephen A. is ever going to escape this. And I don't think any amount of PR is going to fix this.